Our next speaker, Morgan Varner, is in the Department of Forest Resources and Environmental Conservation at Virginia Tech. He leads research on fire and forest ecology in North American savannas, woodlands, and forests. He's also chair of a coalition of prescribed fire councils, over 30 councils that span America and Canada.
Okay. Hear me okay? All right. I'm going to move around some. I was asked to attend and to present today not on anything about my research. So I will not talk about mastication, plant flammability, tree mortality, or plant community responses to fire. Those are all the things I get paid to do. What I'm going to talk about today is something that I'm really passionate about, and a few of you in the room are passionate about, and that is prescribed fire. I serve in my day job is as a professor at a university. My unpaid volunteer passion job is as the chair of the Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils. So I'm going to talk to you about prescribed fire councils. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but I sort of am. Okay, I'm hoping, so my goal for the afternoon is that after my talk and during a break, someone comes up to me and says, hey, I'd like to talk to you about the Prescribed Fire Council in fill-in state in the region. Okay? All right, so I want to tell you about what the Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils is, and I'm just going to call it the Coalition from here on out, and how it takes care of some of the issues that we have been repeatedly discussing over the last day and a half, and that many of us have been discussing in the breaks. And I'll start with a map that's a little bit outdated. This is a map of regional and state level prescribed fire councils, whatever these things are. I'll define that in a second. And you notice a few patterns. What are the patterns that you notice? The interior west is a big gap in the distribution of prescribed fire councils. If these were color-coded for date established, they would start in Florida, and in fact they'd start in South Florida. They would migrate up the peninsula into the panhandle, then they would spread. You'd see this nice spread that would sort of go, it would take care of the southeast, it would move this way, and then there would be little dots that started in the west. In Florida and nowhere else until very recently, they started as small little regional groups that were interested in tackling issues with prescribed fire. So they're in South Florida, for those of you who know that area very well, there are some very large federal ownerships. There are also incredible rangelands. Many of you may have forgotten that, but South Florida is a major rangeland community, and there's incredible development pressure that you also might know about. And so that area formed to tackle the issues that were overlapping, that people felt like they had a right to burn if they were private landowners. Federal agencies needed to burn to promote many endangered species and plant communities that were imperiled, and they were dealing with this constant development pressures. So they formed this organization, and that sort of model has spread. In the West, over the last 5 years, starting in central Washington and northwestern California, also small groups like this started to tackle these issues. And you can see that California is not completely covered. There are 3 individual councils in that state. Since this map was updated, Nevada has changed colors. Nevada is a green, that means it's developing now. Indiana is developing, and so is West Virginia. But that's a pretty impressive coverage of spots. Here's a very long slide that I'm hoping that you just read the orange things, and I'll try to read them to you as well. There is a website if you want more information on this, but in general, the coalition and in individual councils, but the coalition more specifically, the mission is to promote the appropriate use of prescribed fire. Encourage and facilitate the organization of prescribed fire councils. That is what I'm doing here today. And to serve as a forum to voice and address issues of national concern. Lots of prescribed fire issues are local issues. And we see it as almost a representative body, that the coalition, we take local issues that come to the coalition, and then the coalition, we talk to those that can make a difference from a national level or from a regional level. The coalition works to facilitate communication, the point of the last talk. And we serve as this focal point for sharing ideas, information, and hopefully creating opportunities for collaboration. That's like all the words that you've heard over the last several days summed up in a mission statement. How awesome is that? And the coalition is, who the people are, I think, matters too. I'm a university professor, unpaid, including my travel. There are federal employees, so we have liaisons from the Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the NRCS. There are state-level folks. We have a state-level person that represents the National Association of State Foresters from Georgia. There are private forestry consultants, one from Alabama. The Nature Conservancy has been very engaged in the coalition. University professors, 2 of those. And I'm forgetting a couple, but it's just some people, and they're all, the liaisons are there to represent their agencies and to hopefully funnel information back to those that can make change at a national level. And then the rest of us are this passionate group who care about prescribed fire. Okay? You got that? You understand what the coalition is? I think you do too. All right, so I wanted to give a little bit of a history of councils, because I think it's valuable. Like I said, it started in Florida, and one of the first deliverables or outcomes of prescribed fire councils was the Florida Prescribed Burning Law. It's a national model. It was so revolutionary when it came out that a Journal of Forestry article accompanied it. And it goes through, there's some long stuff here, but what it basically says is that, prescription burns that adhere to these 2 conditions receive the following protection. Okay? Fires are considered in the public interest and shall not constitute a public or private nuisance. That's pretty powerful, that there was recognition, and in a state with incredible development pressures, with 1,000 people arriving each day, do the math on that and figure that out. A lot of people die. Those people that move there don't live very long, but there are a lot of people moving there every day, and I'm serious, to do something like this is pretty powerful. So that first one there, it's not a nuisance. When conducted pursuant to state air pollution statutes, blah, 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 blah. Number 2, be considered a property right of the property owner. And when we started the first councils in the West, the Northern California Prescribed Fire Council, the first slide that came up was something about the right to burn. And if you know very much about California and fire, there is a large state organization who does not see that individuals have a right to burn. And so this is a very controversial topic in the West, but in the South and in Florida, considered a property right. And then number 3 here, no property owner or his agent conducting a prescribed burn pursuant to the requirements of this law shall be liable for damage or injury caused by fire or resulting smoke, importantly, unless negligence is proven. And that was also a really powerful component of this law, that it protected, that the concern mentioned in the last presentation, the concern over liability. Whether you're a federal employee and you have those deep pockets behind you, or you're a private consulting forester and you have insurance, liability is still a major issue. And so this law provided protection from the state. And in the subsequent version, they added this word here, gross negligence. Those of you who've been in legal trouble know the difference between negligence and gross negligence. Negligence is you screwed up. And gross negligence is you were told not to do it, you were told again, you did it anyway in spite of the warnings or the reprimands. And so, really powerful law. This law then spread to the other southern states. Alabama just lost their gross negligence standard, but in general, many of the southern states have this sort of have legislation like this. Also, and this is cool, sort of, given especially last night. It's an issue that has spanned the political gradient. This is Bob Graham, former candidate for president on the Democratic side, governor of Florida, great conservation leader. And this is also former governor of Florida that you saw on TV last night, perhaps, Jeb Bush. Both of them in Florida supported not only prescribed burning legislation, but they also supported something called a prescribed burning week, where Bob Graham donned in Nomex, carried a drip torch and took pictures for the media talking about the benefits of prescribed fire. Okay, those are major leaps and things that prescribed fire councils did there. So what councils do is they focus on challenges, and this is a long list that we've kind of talked about a lot already, so it's kind of makes it easy for me. Why fire? If so, how often? A lot of the smoke issues and emissions issues that are becoming smoke has historically been a southeastern problem. There are lots of highway fatalities related to smoke, whether wildfire or prescribed fire, but emissions are becoming a huge issue as the maps of particulate matter, but also ground level ozone and many others over the next few years. The EPA is really changing the way they manage airsheds. When to burn, where to burn, how, and dealing with some of the legacies of fire exclusion, and then the unknown unknowns that are related to, or known unknowns and unknown unknowns related to climate change, etc. So there, smoke, as was just mentioned ad nauseum, but also, so smoke is different from emissions. Smoke has been a huge issue, like I said, in the southeast from a visibility standpoint, and also from the nuisance issues that were just mentioned. And prescribed fire councils have been very engaged in these sorts of activities. But emissions, as I mentioned, are becoming much more important, in particular this last one here, carbon-based emissions that EPA is now taking a much stronger look at. These things are all generated, as you know, in fires, and in wildfires they receive an exemption, in prescribed fires they do not. So these are persistent and looming threats that councils are dealing with. Fire regimes are changing and all the sorts of things we've talked about for the last day and a half, and prescribed fire councils in many locations are working on managed wildfires and thinking about wildfire as very similar to prescribed fire, thinking about the same sorts of issues. That's really exciting for lots of landscapes. Okay, I said this already. There are a lot of challenges. Prescribed fire councils work on challenges like this. And they also work on looking at the patterns of use across the landscape. There was a 2012 survey, the 2015 is about to come out, showing how much burning takes place in individual states. It's not surprising that the same states that started councils are the ones that are burning a lot. Florida's burning almost 2 million acres a year. The state of Georgia has crossed the 1 million acre per year threshold, all in burning in what would be termed silvicultural use, that is burning in forested lands, it's non-agricultural burning. You can see those patterns. Some of you think some of those states are interesting. Oklahoma burns a lot, if you know much about Oklahoma. Okay. There are opportunities that councils are focusing on, and this individual states and individual regions do this differently, but they're clearly working together. This sort of the themes of collaboration, that's one of the themes from the last day and a half, working smarter, having broader fire discussions, having prescribed fire folks who use wildfire as the demon in the room to take advantage of wildfire is a pretty amazing transformation. Working to understand the public, using social science research to help us communicate. The communication story, I think you can hear that repeatedly, and prescribed fire councils are working on those. Working on some sort of the usual suspects, and engaging in research. And they're also making important impacts on the ground. This is the coolest stuff, and I'll wrap up here in a second. One is they're working with prescribed burn associations, that is groups of landowners, individuals that are sharing resources to burn more and burn better. And that's really exciting to see local consortia of individuals working to burn. That's really exciting. They're sharing resources, etc. And the councils themselves are tackling these bigger issues. So PBAs are out there on the land burning. The councils may be burning, but they're certainly tackling policy issues. And then the training exchanges that many have been focusing on. These are around the country now. There's one going on in Northern California right now. And they're not only bringing folks in to increase training and education, that's part of the mission of many of the councils, but they're also burning a lot of lands. And in Northern California, burning a lot of spots that are very difficult to burn under other auspices. And most recently, there's tremendous collaboration with the individual fire science consortia. So the Nevada example that I just talked about, the development of that council would not be possible without strong support of the consortium. The development of the California councils would not have been possible without the consortia. They're helping to bring together these important topics. Okay, the point here is they're increasing. There's fire science delivery happening, which is why one of the reasons why councils, or why the consortia are so interested in individual councils. If they have 1 or 2 meetings per year, some of the councils, like the Florida councils, 250 times 3 councils times 2 meetings per year, that's a lot of fire science delivery that can take place at those events. They're also, in many areas, working to build bridges where there were none before. This is a Northern California Prescribed Fire Council meeting from several years ago, and in this image, it's one of my favorite because there are 3 separate lawsuits, people that have been litigants against agencies in that photo, but they're all there together to talk about prescribed fire. You can see the body language of a couple, but the fact that they're in the same photo is pretty cool, and they're there about prescribed fire, and that's the kind of thing that councils can do. We've had some regional meetings. They're doing lots of stuff, and every state has a different model on how they get stuff done. And whether they're working on state-level training or policy, or they're getting county commissioners to write some sort of proclamation that they support prescribed fire, all of those are valuable. This was just said. Positive messaging, they're doing that. Looking at more research, and I love that this, there tends to be a theme often that we don't need any more research, and what prescribed fire councils are showing is there's a tremendous demand that's feeding back to these individual consortia to say we need more information on a lot of these things. So I will close here. What's the dream here? My job, increased number of councils. You know, some folks say that it should look like this, or maybe it looks like this. There's some reasons for growth in that, one, they've been very successful in doing cool things in locations. The Northern California Council is just inspiring to visit because they're doing neat things that they couldn't have imagined 10 years ago. Prescribed fire is not perfect, and having people talk about the issues with prescribed fire. In Florida, we're arguing about season, burning season. It dominates all the discussions. And so where do they have those discussions? At a council meeting. That's exciting. And I think clearly our current challenges are less than the future challenges. The changes in EPA will affect prescribed burning nationwide, and I think councils are there to be a perfect sort of bridge for that. I said that I want to engage you so that we fill in some of those areas. If you want to talk to me about that, I think that's a clear gap, and some of you are very passionate about prescribed fire, and I hope that we get to talk about it. And I went back and changed my closing slide after the morning's talk. Here is Smokey with a drip torch. You can contact me there or catch me later on.
There's plenty of time for questions.
Great. Yes, sir.
Who usually starts a council? Would it be a Fed person or a state or private? Who leads them?
That's a great question, and it's complicated. It's a complicated question. The Washington office of the USDA Forest Service has weighed in, and federal agencies should not do that. Federal agencies are involved in every council, and they have had leadership positions in the past, but they should serve as liaisons because of the conflict. The councils get money, and the councils can be involved, depending on the council, they can be involved in advocacy. And so those clearly contradict, according to the Washington office, they clearly contradict some of the things that you need to do for your job. And so it depends is the answer. In some states, private consultants run everything. In other states, the state forester is the person who bangs the gavel at the meeting. It really depends, and it's really diverse. And usually it's neat because councils reflect the local atmosphere. And so in Northern California, they're like hugging each other at all the meetings. Man, you look great. How you doing? Something about your chakras. That's their discussion. And then the contrast is the Northwest Florida Prescribed Fire Council, where I started, and I swear when you leave the place, you feel like you've been in a revival. Because there's so many, people are giving, they're praying before each talk, or before at the beginning of the meeting, let's say a convocation, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of invocations, so there's a lot of that sort of thing, and it reflects the local local environment.
Are any of the fire science networks leading?
Yeah, they are. And so the western ones have been primarily the Northwest Fire Science Exchange, or they have been instrumental. So the Oregon Council would not have started without it, and they've been instrumental in maintaining that and keeping some of the energy going. The California councils have staff people that have staff time that is from the regional consortium, from the California consortium. The Joint Fire Science Program is very supportive as long as they're not supporting advocacy, because the fire science delivery that individual councils can do, they tend to reach a different audience. So if a consortium sets up a workshop, it'll be attended by federal and maybe state employees. If a prescribed fire council sets up one, because of their focus on private landowners, it'll be private landowners, almost all the state, and then some of the feds will show up. And so it's a really nice balance for them. Can I take more?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I guess I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Do the councils coordinate with prescribed fire training centers like FUDA
Oh, I will.
and PFTC?
Yep. So the question was, do the individual councils collaborate with, for example, the Prescribed Fire Training Center located in Thomasville, Tallahassee, and other spots? They do. And that's that's also part of this unique, the local flavor. The TREX phenomenon, that these training exchanges that have been supported by the Fire Learning Network and others, a lot of that has been overlapping with individual prescribed fire councils. And so prescribed fire councils, when they ask their members, what do you want? They'll say more training opportunities and more education. And so that TREX phenomenon has really overlapped. And so the past several in California have been sponsored by and coordinated by the Prescribed Fire Council. And I think that's a really cool potential model too. And I think that's the neat thing, is that the question is, who does this? And I always say, whoever wants to. And then what do they look like? And if it's the Wisconsin one, I don't want to pick on anybody from Wisconsin here. Okay. They're like 12 people, and they're all guys, and they all sit in a room and talk about prescribed fire. Whereas the other councils, maybe that's a Wisconsin thing, but other councils have, like I said, there are 200 or 300 people there, and they go on for multiple days. I mean, I think it's important that they're organic and that they represent the local community as well as the issues. For South Florida, their strong development story. They also have some strong season. They're federal dominated land base, whereas Central Florida is private dominated land base with very different sorts of development pressures. And North Florida is a mixture of two, but now it brings in the Department of Defense. So I think as long as the council represents the local area, that's the important thing. Yep. The question was, has there been a lot of Native American involvement? It varies. And the Northern California Council that I helped start is my favorite, is the coolest example, I think. So in that council, their board has 2 or 3 representatives from different tribes. So, one way these things happen is there tends to be a token representative. Well, the tribes are very different. It's like saying we're going to have a federal representative. It could be the Forest Service, or it could be the National Park Service, or it might be EPA, same sort of thing. And so there are multiple tribal representatives, and this Northern California TREX, both the one that's occurring right now and the one that occurred 2 weeks ago, are both focused on tribal lands. So this one was on the Yurok tribe and some of the Karuk lands. So it's really, really strong involvement, and that's been super neat. I mean, that's a very different model. In the southeastern councils, no one there is at all from a tribe. Mississippi has the Choctaw tribe that is engaged, but in general, they're lacking altogether. And so I think that's a cool thing about the Western councils, is that they're engaged with the tribes much more.
If you haven't given this presentation in northern Idaho or western Montana, I suggest you do it. I'd be happy to send you some contacts.
That map should have northern Idaho and western Montana as green. So we are developing one right now. That may be, I thought it would be the Great Basin, but that may be the first not within a state boundary council, because they already have that air shed, y'all know this thing, right? Airshed Working Group or something, whatever they're called. They're going to use that same footprint for their council. The weird thing about that is that for most places you need it to be within a state because the state is legislating. But when the landscape is so predominantly federally owned, it might be a neat way, a neat model. We thought about it and we've talked about different models for the Great Basin, whether there should be this big blob. And right now, Nevada is going forth. They're very close to being an orange state. They're very close to having a council. They've done a lot of work on this. And I think that's probably the, sort of building up. California, there are 3 councils that cover 2/3 of the state. Clearly the issues in Southern California, as every map will show, whether it's smoke or development or air quality, all those sorts of issues, it's a tough one. And so instead of them making us making a statewide one, we did it and bit off small pieces. Okay, thank you.